where we think deeply about things.
Mm.
Today we're going to be looking at this idea of time management
Okay.
and how to actually make the most of it.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and we're going to be taking a look at Oliver Burkeman's book, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals.
Right.
And the title alone, 4,000 Weeks, kind of a wake-up call, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it really puts things in perspective.
Yeah, makes you realize just how finite our time is.
It does. And you know what I appreciate about Berkman's approach is that he doesn't sugarcoat things.
Right.
He just flat out says, this idea of completely mastering our time, optimizing every minute to be our most productive selves.
Yeah.
It's just not realistic.
Okay, so no more productivity hacks.
Yeah.
So what does he suggest we do instead?
Well, he encourages us to embrace this idea of finitude.
Finitude.
Yeah. Basically, it means accepting that we have limits.
Okay.
There will always be more to do than we have time for. And that's where things get interesting, because according to Burkeman, that's where our true freedom lies.
Wait, freedom?
Yeah.
But how can having limits make us more free? I feel like those two ideas are usually at odds.
Well, I know, right? It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But think about it this way. When you have unlimited choices,
Mm-hmm.
it can be paralyzing.
Oh, yeah.
You spend so much time agonizing over decisions, trying to optimize every little thing, that you end up feeling trapped.
You're constantly second-guessing yourself.
Yes,
Wondering if you're making the right choice, and it's exhausting.
exactly. So by accepting our limits, by acknowledging that we can't do everything,
Yeah.
we're actually giving ourselves permission to focus on what truly matters.
So how do we actually do that? I mean, it's one thing to say embrace your limits, but it's another to actually put it into practice.
Right.
So where do we even start?
Well, Berkman uses this really vivid analogy. He says that most of us are running around trying to spin a million plates at once, desperately trying to keep them all in the air.
Oh, I am definitely guilty of that work, family, social life hobbies. It's like I'm constantly juggling.
Right, and that's where the burnout comes in.
Yeah.
But what if instead of trying to spin all those plates, we focus on sitting down and enjoying a really good meal?
Okay, so instead of multitasking and spreading ourselves thin,
Yeah.
we should be more selective about where we direct our energy.
Exactly.
But how do we figure out which plates to let drop? Those choices can be tough.
Absolutely. And Berkman doesn't shy away from that. He acknowledges that accepting limits means making some difficult choices.
Right.
And those choices often involve trade-offs.
Right.
There's no magic formula.
So how do we navigate those tricky decisions? Does he offer any guidance on that?
He does. He suggests a strategy inspired by Warren Buffett. Have you heard of Buffett's 25 goals exercise?
Vaguely, but refresh my memory.
Okay. So Buffett apparently advised writing down 25 goals, then you rank them in order of importance.
Okay.
But here's the kicker. You only focus on the top 5 and completely discard the rest.
Wow, that takes some serious discipline. Why just 5?
Because it forces you to confront your true priorities by consciously letting go of those other 20 goals.
Yeah.
You're freeing up mental space and energy to fully commit to the things that matter most.
Yeah.
Berkman argues that this is how you avoid getting distracted by the good while pursuing the great.
That makes a lot of sense. But I imagine letting go of those other goals could be pretty tough, especially if they're things that you genuinely care about.
It definitely takes courage, but Berkman's point is that sometimes saying no is the most powerful way to say yes to the things that truly matter.
It's about choosing your battles, so to speak.
Exactly.
And speaking of battles, this all ties back to that initial idea that accepting our limits can actually make us more free.
Yes.
It's about recognizing that we can't have it all and then deciding where we want to invest our precious time.
Exactly. And it's not about resigning ourselves to a life of limitations,
Right.
but rather about creating space for the things that bring us joy, purpose, and meaning.
I like that.
Yeah. This idea of embracing our limits can actually lead to some unexpected benefits.
Like what? Besides freeing up mental space,
Well, Berkman argues that constraints, those very things that we often perceive as obstacles, can actually spark creativity and resourcefulness.
That's interesting. It's like when you give a kid, a limited number of toys, they often come up with the most imaginative games.
Exactly.
But how does that apply to adults in the real world?
Well, think about it this way. When you have limited resources, whether it's time, money, or even physical space, it forces you to think outside the box. You have to get creative with what you have.
You're forced to innovate, come up with solutions you might not have considered otherwise.
Precisely. And sometimes those constraints can lead to breakthroughs or discoveries that you wouldn't have made if you had unlimited options.
Right.
It's about making the most of what you have.
So instead of viewing limitations as roadblocks, we should see them as opportunities for innovation.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, and Berkman shares a really powerful anecdote in the book to illustrate this point. It's from Bruce Springsteen's memoir, Born to Run.
Oh, I love the boss. What's the story?
Well, as you might imagine, Springsteen was known for keeping musicians hours, staying up late, writing and playing music he'd often sleep in until noon. But one day, his wife, Patty Shelfa, saw him in bed at midday and said, "You're gonna miss it."
Miss what?
Springsteen was confused, so Patty explained, "The kids, the morning, it's the best time. It's when they need you the most. They're different in the morning than at any other time of day, and if you don't get up to see it well, then you're gonna miss it."
Wow, that's a real gut punch. So what did Springsteen do?
He decided to embrace the constraint. The next day, he got up early and learned to make pancakes.
Oh, that's so sweet. And it's a perfect example of how choosing to embrace a constraint, in this case, waking up earlier, can lead to something incredibly meaningful.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most fulfilling experiences come from working within certain limitations. And it makes you wonder what constraints have brought you unexpected joy or meaning.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back to when I first started writing and I had a very strict word count limit for each piece.
Yeah.
At first, it felt incredibly restrictive, but it forced me to be concise and to really hone my craft.
Right.
And in the end, it made my writing stronger.
There you go. It's like that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention.
Right.
Sometimes those limitations can be the catalyst for some of our most creative and rewarding experiences.
And this all ties back to the idea of being present, of appreciating the journey rather than just focusing on the destination.
Right, because when we're constantly striving for more, for better, for faster, we often miss the beauty of the present moment.
And in this case, the journey is our life, not the outcome.
Right.
I think Berkman's point is that by accepting our limitations, we're freeing ourselves up to enjoy the ride.
Absolutely. And it's not just about enjoying the ride, it's also about being more intentional about how we spend our time. We all have 4,000 weeks, more or less, and it's up to us to decide what we want to do with them.
And to be fair, not everyone has the same level of freedom when it comes to time.
That's a really important point. Some people have more flexibility than others due to work schedules, family obligations, or even just societal norms.
So this isn't about shaming anyone for not being productive enough.
No, not at all.
It's about encouraging those who do have some level of control over their time to use it wisely.
Exactly. And I think Berkman would agree that the ability to make choices about our time is a privilege.
Right.
And it's something we shouldn't take for granted.
He actually uses a really poignant example in the book. It's about Esau McCaulley, a New York Times columnist who was planning to take on more work to provide more for his family.
Oh, yes, I remember that one.
But his 12-year-old daughter had a different perspective. She told him that she would rather have 20% more of his time than 20% more stuff.
That is so powerful. It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
It really does, and it reminds us that sometimes the most valuable gift we can give the people we love is simply our presence, our time.
And that presence doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be Instagram worthy.
It's about being there, being fully engaged, and savoring those moments, even the messy ones.
Exactly, because in the end, those are the moments that matter most.
So we've talked about embracing limits, making tough choices,
Right.
and even finding joy in constraints.
Yeah.
But what does it all really mean for us as we navigate our own 4,000 weeks?
You know, I think it's about recognizing that time is not something to be conquered or
Right.
optimized to death.
It's more about choosing to spend it in a way that feels meaningful and aligned with our values, right?
Exactly. And sometimes that means letting go of the things that we think we should be doing
Yeah.
and focusing on what actually brings us joy and purpose.
And I think that's where a lot of us get tripped up. We get caught up in the shoulds, the expectations, the endless to-do lists.
Right? We compare ourselves to others, we buy into the hustle culture, and we end up feeling overwhelmed and burnt out.
So what's the antidote to all that?
Well, I think it starts with awareness, recognizing those patterns of thinking, those societal pressures that make us feel like we're never doing enough.
Okay, and then making a conscious choice to step back and reassess.
Right. Asking ourselves, what really matters to me?
Yeah.
What do I want my legacy to be?
And it doesn't have to be some grand world-changing legacy either.
Right.
It could be as simple as being a loving parent,
Exactly.
a supportive friend, or someone who brings a little bit of beauty into the world.
Absolutely.
It's about finding those things that make your heart sing and then making time for them,
Yeah.
even if it means saying no to other things. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from Berkman's book. It's not about finding more time.
Right.
It's about making different choices.
It's about accepting that we can't do everything, But we can do something meaningful with the time that we have.
And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.
Maybe that's a real secret to time management.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this Deep Thought session.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas
It has.
with you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Deep Thought Podcast, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on future Deep Thought sessions.
Yes. And be sure to check out our other podcasts for even more deep dives.
Yes, and for those of you who are interested in diving deeper into Oliver Burkeman's 4,000 Weeks, we've included a link to purchase the book below the video. It's a truly thought-provoking read.
It is.
Until next time, keep thinking deeply.